Glad you're here this morning. Thank you for continuing to support our virtual programming. It means a lot to us that you continue faithfully to show up, and I know it means a lot to those who participate in this format. I don't want to miss another opportunity to thank Carol Gay, who continues to make Credo possible. Carol, thank you so much for your work on behalf of all of us. And again, with the request that you mute yourselves and now go to speaker view, I'm going to turn it over to Carol to introduce this morning's presenter. Thank you, Carol.
Okay, good morning, and thank you, Jay. I'm happy to introduce
You're muted, Carol.
Thank you. I'll start all over. Okay. Good morning, and thank you, Jay. I'm happy to introduce our speaker for today, Debbie Rubenstein. She's been a member of our community for 14 years. And during that time, she's done a lot of volunteer work for us. She has served on our board of directors, on the stewardship team, and she's more recently been on the racial justice engagement team. So I'm going to let her speak in just a moment. She'll speak for about 15 or 20 minutes. And during that time, you can write any questions you have for her on chat, which, as most of you know, is an icon on the bottom of your screen in the middle. And you can write questions after she finishes as we go through our question and answer. I would ask you, please keep your questions concise and short, and please keep them in the form of a question. After Debbie concludes, I'll read your questions to Debbie as time allows, and we'll take questions for 10 minutes or so. So I'll turn things over to you, Debbie, and welcome.
Thank you. So I'll just start by saying, I'm really curious. What brought you here today to listen to me? What brought you to the UUCC? And where are you from? And what is your secret superpower? Mine is I'm just damn curious. Some have called it nosy. Some have called it pushy. Some have called it friendly. But no matter what you call it, I can't help but wonder at the way people and the world are put together. And I've always been that way. From the time I could toddle, I would meet a request to do something with, why? How come? Where? Well, what if, my dad, I would always say, why do I have to work in the office at the family store while my brothers get to work as a sales clerk? And to my rabbi, do I have to believe in God to be a good Jew? What about to be a bad Jew? And for my mother, why do you always fill in the blank? And take a moment to send a sympathetic thought to my mom. Curiosity is the engine that has propelled me through life. It explains my eclectic career, my roving travels, but it's also responsible for my relationship with my husband and my children. And it's a coping mechanism when I confront unexpected change. And it has revealed some deeper values that I practice every day. So, I always loved school, probably because every single semester, I got a whole new set of questions that I got to explore. Biology, geology, history, new books. Spent the semester answering them, and then next semester, we got a whole new set. For the same reason, I loved documentary journalism, which is what I spent my 20s and early 30s doing. We would always start with a long list of questions. And when we found answers to those questions and illustrated them in video, we got to move on to an entirely new set of questions from a brand new area. As a young woman, I got to work on programs about poetry, about dying, about political issues and religion, about combating hatred, violence. I had this immense good fortune to work for the great journalist Bill Moyers and his equally extraordinary wife, Judith Davidson Moyers, for 12 years. But I have never met anyone as curious as Bill. His interests had no limits, and under his tutelage and the guidance of so many others at the company who shared their values, his and Judith's values, I learned that real curiosity can't help but inspire compassion. Because if you genuinely want to know about a person, you have to shed judgment for compassion. Finding out who someone is means they have to believe that you are open to all of who they are. It doesn't mean you're amoral, right? We made documentaries that were unstinting in their evaluations, like Trade Secrets that uncovered 30 years of systemic and calculated deception by the chemical industry, which has led to dangerous substances throughout our water and food systems. It does mean, though, that when you talk to the guy who reps for the chemical lobby, you have to know that he has a reason for what he's doing, and he sees himself as the good guy. So you have to truly want to understand his reasons rather than shame him when you're talking to him. And it wasn't just on screen that I learned compassion from working with the Moyers and company. It was the office itself, which was structured around it. Do you remember your first job? How incredibly terrifying it was? You have no blueprint of what you're supposed to do. You're not getting grades. There's no faculty or administration to take complaints to, no parent to write you an excuse. I had all those fears, and I was on my own to figure out how to do the job and handle the praise and the negative feedback. And I was doing this job for one of my intellectual heroes far from home. I mean, I lived in a state of perpetual terror, right? My immediate boss, Judy Doctoroff, shared this sort of curiosity and compassion of all the staff. And so I was fortunate because the first time I really, really fluffed something, I went home, I was feeling so much shame and I did not know what was going to happen. I knew I had to tell them the situation. And then what? Would I be fired? Would I be yelled at in front of the staff? Would no one speak to me? I walked in the office and I told Judy about the problem, and I'm crying and I'm trying not to cry and I'm just spiraling and spiraling. And she gives me a Kleenex, and then she just started to ask questions. Tell me more about what you were thinking and how this came about. Tell me what you hoped would happen, she would ask. What do you think is going to happen at this point? Is there anything we can do together to kind of move this in the right direction? I honestly will never forget it. She made an assumption, it was embedded in the question, that all people make mistakes and that I must have a reason, and probably a good reason, for the situation we were in. And what needed to happen now was just that we needed to together evaluate the situation and recalibrate. It was an act of compassion born out of her curiosity. And in 12 years of working at that job, that compassionate curiosity sheltered me, and I bent myself to learning how to reflect that same spirit. So my move to Charlotte changed my career, but curiosity came with me. I knew little of this area, of what the job possibilities were, what my life might look like here. I was still busy trying to figure out parenthood as well. I had an 18-month-old and soon I had 2 kids. All I could do was ask questions, but those questions weren't helping me. I felt untethered and uncertain about what I was supposed to do here. And I realized that while I was still curious and I hoped compassionate, the piece I had lost was commitment. Curiosity's questions can be understood through compassion, but they can only be answered through the work of commitment. Commitment to me means acting in service of something over and over again. To me, that is a sacred act, no matter what it is in service of. And commitment doesn't come easy to me. I'm always looking for a new question. I bore quickly and badly. In relationships, for example, I rarely had long relationships. When I did manage to live with someone in my mid-20s, I couldn't commit to him for the long term, and so we split up. I found myself hanging out a lot with this old friend, David Flynn. When it became clear that we were attracted to each other, It was easy for me to put the kibosh on anything more. I was vulnerable, I was hurt, and I was not interested in committing myself to something new. But I was also curious. I mean, every time I came up with a new reason why we shouldn't date, he came up with a new and interesting way to answer those concerns. Eventually, I was just curious enough about this man who didn't give up, didn't quail under criticism, and whose sense of self was strong enough to stand up to my ferocity, that I sort of edged my way there. We began dating and eventually we got married, but then on our wedding night, we were alone and I burst into tears. And he asked, "Why are you crying?" And I tried to explain that I was really afraid. I mean, now we were married, now we were committed. Now I could really get hurt, not just by his actions, but by fate. I mean, what if he died? What if he became disabled? What if I did? What were we thinking? We would be together forever now, at every holiday, every celebration. What did we just promise each other? But I came to understand the ways in which marriage is not about those promises made at the altar. It's about the 5,000th time he picks up my shoes from the den that I left there again, and he puts them away and he doesn't complain. It's about the 3,000th time I've sorted through his files and his piles, I should say, and put them in a file without complaint. It's just part of the deal. It's the daily acts of consideration and partnership. It's that commitment, just like being a parent. You love your kid, but it's the wiping of the butts, the driving them to activities, the listening to the story that doesn't seem to have a beginning, a middle, or an end. And the being open to their ideas, their new ideas about the way the world should be. It's those acts of commitment and attention that create the love and relationship of parenting and of a marriage. And commitment is also what settled me in Charlotte. You know, it took my kids entering school for me to feel connected enough to something to commit. And so in this case, I started advocating for better and fairer school funding. And then I started taking more risks. I started a business that failed. I joined a nonprofit that closed. And I worked on some political campaigns that succeeded. But change happened in that. It happened for me, it happened in Charlotte, and it happened because I committed myself. Just like being a UU. I really love our principles, but it's not the principles that make me a UU. It is the relationships that I've developed and the work of being a COA mentor, of being on stewardship and explaining why this place matters to other people. It's the everyday work of community here that makes me a UU. Just as it's the yearly Passover service that we just did last night, it's the Hanukkah celebrations, it's the visits to temple that continue to make me a Jew. And curiosity continues to guide my path. So this past fall, I lost the vision in my left eye over the course of a few days, and that eventually led to a diagnosis of a rare autoimmune disorder, neurological disorder, similar to MS, called MOG-AD. It's not well understood, was only described in 2016, so it just is this huge gray, uncertain future that it presents, right? MOG may cost me all my sight, it may cost me my mobility, it may cost me my cognition, but it may not. I could live to an old age and nothing else could ever happen. There's no way to predict. And so the pandemic has been great in helping me prepare for things like uncertainty, but I was still pretty unmoored by the diagnosis. And I was unclear how to incorporate it into my thinking about who I am and how I am in relationship with others. But you know, I've read a lot of Oliver Sacks in my life, the great neurologist who coincidentally also lost his sight in his left eye before he died of a rare cancer. So feeling afraid of blindness, I channeled Sacks's curiosity and reread him, and then used him to guide me as I reached out to friends like Kate Stroud, who could answer my questions and help fill in that gray, uncertain space with some more concrete images of what it might look like and feel like to rely on senses other than vision. By exploring my questions deeply, I sort of reignited a renewed compassion for myself and others and a deeper understanding of the ways normalcy can still resurface in my life. And I made a commitment to my health, even though I don't really know whether what I eat and how I exercise will have any impact on my final outcome. But I also don't really know whether the disease will have an impact on my life either. So the commitment on its own is a way of valuing myself, regardless of what happens. So those are, at least today's version, of the values that propel my actions most directly: curiosity, compassion, and commitment. So what are you curious about? Do you have any questions?
Okay, thank you, Debbie. What
Thank
a
you.
what a great way to lead into our question and answer session. So remember, if you have a question you'd like to ask of Debbie, please write it on chat. And so let me go see there if what we might have. Oh, the only one is from me. All right, everybody, start writing some questions. My question is, what's one hard question you're still dealing with? Maybe you've already answered that.
Well, I mean, it's both like all these questions, it's the same and different as everyone else's, which is, what now is the hard question, right? Kids are getting older. For me, it's different influences that may be making me ask that question, but it's the same question, isn't it, that we're always asking, like, where am I right now and what's next? How do I want to do this thing called my life? With the time I have left, and I don't know what that time is. So what do I want to do with it?
Okay. As an incorrigible alliterist, as in alliteration, I love your 3 C's. Who modeled commitment for you and helped shape how you think about that virtue?
That is an interesting question. And yeah, I knew you'd pick up on that. I think my first model for commitment was really my mom, who, she's not shy about, she didn't pretend that everything about her life was something that brought her great joy, but it didn't seem to, it's my mom and my dad, both of them. So my mom, she didn't pretend everything brought her joy, but that didn't have anything to do with whether or not she still had a responsibility to do it. And I could see that the doing of it had a value and brought value to the work, even if the work itself didn't seem meaningful in and of itself to her. And my dad, it's all about duty for my father. And so watching him work every day, I mean, my father worked 6 days a week, all his life. He's now 82 years old. He still goes into the office 6 days a week. So I think they were my first models of that commitment. But I saw it all. I mean, you can see it. There are so many people who commit themselves every day to work. I mean, I could point to, there was a woman I could point to lots of people, some who were acquaintances only. They're just people who worked in the same place I worked and I saw doing things. But you can see how the work itself brings meaning. Doing the work brings meaning to the work.
Okay, thank you. All right, this next one is not in the form of a question, but I'm going to read it anyhow because it's a nice compliment. The person said, excellent. It would make a good magazine article, maybe Medium Digest. I don't know if you've heard of that.
Thank you. I have. I appreciate that. I'll take that under consideration.
What have been your self-care practices during this past year of lockdown?
So I'm really bad at setting up routines. I'm just going to say that right now. So, when pandemic started, I had all these ideas of this will be great. I'm going to write something every day for the pandemic. I'm going to do this. I don't do that. I'm not good at routines. I'm very resentful, even if I set it up. most of my self-care has been about a mindset, trying to really check in with myself about what am I feeling right now today, and then framing the things I do as a choice. So, I felt all this tension from not setting up regular self-care routines and not taking advantage of this time in one way or another. And I was like, okay, you're going to stop now. You're going to check in. If what you need to do right now is read a book, then you'll read a book. And you're not going to feel bad about it. And you're not going to pretend that you're stealing it from something. You're going to be open about it, and you're going to read a book, and you're going to set a timer or not. And if the timer goes off and you're like, no, I still need to read, then you're going to do that. These are going to be choices. So I don't have a good answer for that. I don't have something that I've done all the time, but it's more just a mindset of trying to be forgiving and compassionate to myself and to other people. Although I did do one thing. I set up a weekly call. We've fallen off a little bit, but I set up a weekly call with a group of women friends, which was awesome.
Okay, here's another question. What are you still most curious about and exploring?
Honestly, it's broad. Like, I listen. What don't I know yet? Like, there's a lot. So, I listen to a lot of podcasts. Depending on what's happening to me, I'm exploring different things. So I am doing a lot of research right now into nutrition and the immune system, but I'm also listening to podcasts about astronauts, and I'm listening to, researching stuff about Tacoma, where my daughter now lives. I mean, yeah, lots. I can't give you a single answer.
All right. Debbie, your commitment to UUCC is clear. What have you gotten out of it?
I've gotten a community that supported me. The move to Charlotte was not one that I was excited about. It's one that I did willingly, but not happily, would be the way I'd put it. And it was really important to me to find communities of people who could accentuate the things that we were looking for here in Charlotte and minimize the things that I did not want. And the UUCC has provided that for us. We looked for a neighborhood and a community in schools, and a community in our other spaces that could provide models of acceptance and support. And that's what I feel like we've gotten at the UUCC.
All right, here's a question that I thought of because I was a former teacher. Did or have you driven people crazy with your questions, people like teachers?
So I drove my family insane with questions, yes. And it depended on the teacher. Some teachers like that, some teachers don't. So it really depended. I was either, a student that a teacher really enjoyed, or I could feel the sigh. So
when finding answers to your questions, how do you make sure that you are confident in the answers, and how do you measure the reliability of your sources?
It's a great question. Journalism helped me a lot with the latter part of that. Reliability of sources has to do with, first of all, like all good journalists do, I try to get double confirmation. So one source saying something is never enough. I won't have to get a second source. I want to see where the information comes from. What are they basing it on? What are their sources? History helped me with that too. I was a history major. And so I try to go, if I read an article about a study, I usually go to the study itself and I try to evaluate how the study was done. And what was the first part about how do I make sure I have confidence in the answers? So those are the ways I try to have confidence in the answers, but let's be honest with one another. A lot of times action has to happen before you know whether without confidence and without confidence of rightness. You have to make your best judgment and then move forward. And I think that's where commitment is very helpful. I think it's still valuable to commit yourself. You just have to also, we all have to learn to be okay with being wrong. Like, you're gonna be wrong sometimes. So keep listening, keep evaluating. Don't say I reached a decision and I'm acting and now I'm done. You have to be willing to be like, oh, I did not see it that way. Let me reconsider.
Here's another one. Another C word. Do you think you are living your life with intentional courage?
I don't know what that is. I mean, I don't mean that in a, I'm not sure. I don't really know what courage is when it comes to this kind of thing, in that we live our lives influenced by the emotions and the drives that we both have innately and that we nurture in ourselves. And so if I'm someone whose curiosity outstrips my fear, it's not necessarily a choice I make. And it doesn't mean someone whose fear is greater than their curiosity isn't courageous. They're often, just doing something that maybe doesn't scare me, but scares them, takes more courage for them. I don't know if that answers the question. I'm not sure how to answer it, because I'm not sure I have a sense of what intentional courage looks like.
Okay. Here's a question that may relate to your condition that you're dealing with. It says, how has your diet changed? Have you tried veganism, whole food, plant-based, and it can fight autoimmune conditions?
I appreciate that. And that, that's certainly what I'm finding, is that whole foods and fruits and vegetables and all of that, that's the way to support your immune system, among other things. My diet hasn't really changed, because I was already eating, I eat a pretty whole foody kind of diet. I'm not a vegan, but did I mention the commitment part? How that's a struggle? Don't like eliminating one thing entirely. Get very resentful. But I have moved my way towards incorporating, I've explored out of curiosity. We've talked a lot about veganism at the church, so I've certainly explored. I've incorporated a lot more things into my diet that are vegan friendly. I use almond milk a lot. I often will eat vegan food before dinner. Not always, but often. What has really changed is exercise, which used to feel indulgent, so it was easy to skip. Now I have a better commitment to it since my diagnosis.
Okay, it's 11 o'clock now, so we have a few more questions, and I'd like to go on, but we better not. Debbie, thank you so much. What you've said to us today was stimulating and challenging, and you've made us think a lot with your questions. So we really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
I just want to say, I really appreciate the opportunity to do this. Just the opportunity to think deeply about these questions and to share. It's a gift, and I appreciate it. Thank you all.
Oh, good. That's great. Well, join us next month for on the fourth Sunday of the month at 10:30 or just before 10:30, and we'll do another Credo. All right. Thank you, everybody.